I'm at the airport right now. She's finally here. She just flew in from India on a fiancé visa. This is the first time we're meeting in person. I've seen her 100 times on screen. In real life, she's even more beautiful. We didn't need anything big. Just the two of us and this moment. That's enough for me.
What will happen to me when he dies? His children will throw me out as if I never existed. I can't let that happen.
Pay close attention to the sequence of short videos recorded at the beginning of this relationship. The first clip was filmed inside an airport arrivals terminal. Rajiv Malhotra speaks into his phone, calm and confident. He says she has just landed from India on a fiancé visa. He adds that this is the first time they are meeting in person. The second clip was recorded moments later. Rajiv turns the camera toward her and says he has seen her many times on a screen, but that she is even more beautiful in real life. The comment is brief and unguarded. The third recording comes from a courthouse weeks later. There is no ceremony, no guests. Rajiv says they did not need anything big. Just the two of them in that moment. He says it is enough. The fourth clip was never meant to be shared. It shows Anushka alone, speaking into her phone in a private space. She asks what will happen to her when he dies. She says his children will throw her out like she never existed. She says she cannot allow that to happen. At the time, these videos appeared unrelated moments from different stages of a new marriage. Investigators would later determine that together, they documented the beginning of a plan that ended during a single weekend in a remote guest house. The next footage comes from a highway surveillance camera. It shows their vehicle moving steadily toward the mountains. Traffic is light. Nothing appears unusual. This is the last time they are seen together before the weekend begins. Rajiv Malhotra was 55, wealthy, and restless. Rajiv Malhotra was 55 years old and financially secure. He had lived in the United States for most of his adult life and built his wealth through commercial real estate projects and private lending. His lifestyle reflected discipline and control. He exercised daily, monitored his health metrics, and relied heavily on technology to manage his environment. Every home he owned or rented was fully automated. Lighting, locks, temperature, security systems, and even fireplace airflow were controlled through centralized applications. Rajiv believed that systems reduced risk and that preparation prevented accidents. Despite professional success, his personal life was limited. He lived alone in a large house designed for hosting but rarely used for that purpose. His first marriage had ended years earlier. He had 2 adult children from that relationship, but their contact was infrequent and formal. Outside of work, his routine lacked emotional connection. That absence made him receptive when attention appeared unexpectedly. Anushka came into his life through an online matchmaking platform. She was 27 years old and living in India at the time. Her profile was restrained. There were no luxury signals, no dramatic presentation. During their conversations, Rajiv did most of the talking. He explained his work, his daily schedule, and his homes. Anushka listened carefully and responded with short, focused questions. Her approach made Rajiv feel understood rather than challenged. As their calls continued, Rajiv began showing her his surroundings over video. He walked through his house holding his phone, pointing out features he was proud of. He demonstrated how a single application controlled lighting zones, security cameras, and environmental systems. He spent time explaining details most people ignored. Anushka watched without interruption. She did not ask technical questions. She simply observed. Several months later, Anushka arrived in the United States on a fiancé visa. Rajiv met her at the airport and recorded a short video marking the moment. Within weeks, they married in a private ceremony. There were no public announcements or extended celebrations. Rajiv described the marriage as a reset and spoke about it as a practical decision rather than a romantic one. After the wedding, Rajiv integrated Anushka into his structured life. He introduced her to his accountant and his attorney. He explained his financial setup and the legal boundaries he maintained with his children. Those boundaries had been in place for years and were not adjusted immediately. He also showed her the lifestyle he enjoyed outside the city. Rajiv frequently rented high-end guest houses in the mountains for short stays. These properties were modern, isolated, and designed around automation. They appealed to him because they offered privacy and technological reliability. During their first visit to one of these houses together, Rajiv gave Anushka a full tour. He explained how the smart lock worked, how the climate system adjusted to weather conditions, and how the fireplace was managed through the same interface. Late that night, he demonstrated the fireplace controls in detail. He showed how the system normally regulated airflow automatically. He also pointed out that the system could be switched to manual mode if needed. He treated this explanation casually, as a convenience rather than a risk. He laughed while showing it and made a brief comment that if anything malfunctioned, the settings could be adjusted manually and reset afterward. Anushka did not respond verbally. She stood nearby and watched. At the time, there was nothing unusual about the moment. It appeared to be part of Rajiv's habit of explaining systems he trusted. That first weekend ended without incident, and they returned to the city. What remained was not the trip itself, but the information he had shared and the access he had provided without considering how it could later be used. In the weeks following the wedding, investigators later noted a gradual shift in Anushka's behavior. It was not dramatic and did not draw immediate concern. She remained attentive when Rajiv spoke about their future together, plans for travel, and life in the United States. But her demeanor changed noticeably whenever his children were mentioned or contacted him. During those moments, she became distant and withdrawn. She did not confront Rajiv directly, and she never criticized his children openly. Instead, Anushka focused her conversations on insecurity. She spoke about her position in the country, her lack of family nearby, and her dependence on Rajiv for legal and financial stability. According to Rajiv's later statements to his attorney, she repeatedly framed her concerns as fear rather than entitlement. She asked what would happen to her if he died suddenly. She questioned whether his children would accept her or force her out. She raised concerns about access to money, housing, and legal status, always presenting them as worst-case scenarios rather than demands. Rajiv responded to this pressure in a predictable way. He did not confront the emotional issue directly. He attempted to resolve it administratively. His existing will had been in place for years. It left the majority of his estate to his 2 adult children, with provisions that guaranteed a spouse housing and financial support. To Rajiv, the document was fair and balanced. Anushka did not challenge the structure of the will. She focused on uncertainty. She asked what would happen if accounts were frozen during probate. She questioned how long court processes could take. She suggested that legal disputes could leave her without access to resources at a critical moment. These conversations were not heated. They were repetitive and persistent. Within a short period, Rajiv decided to act. He scheduled a private meeting with his attorney without informing his children. 3 days before their planned weekend trip to the mountains, Rajiv signed a revised will. The new document named Anushka as the sole beneficiary of his estate. His children were fully excluded. According to later testimony, Rajiv expressed hesitation during the signing but stated that he wanted to prevent future conflict and ensure stability for his wife. The decision did not bring Rajiv peace. Records later showed that he continued to express uncertainty after the document was signed. On the Friday afternoon drive to the guest house, he attempted to reassure Anushka while also leaving room for reversal. He told her that the weekend should be calm and that after returning home, they could revisit the estate plan. He mentioned the possibility of creating a trust and restoring provisions for his children. Anushka did not respond verbally. She did not argue or object. When they arrived at the guest house, the property activated automatically. Exterior lights illuminated the driveway, and the door unlocked through a digital system. The house was modern and minimalist, designed for short stays rather than permanent living. There was no staff on site and no neighboring houses within view. Inside, Rajiv focused on settling in. He unpacked, connected his phone to the sound system, and selected music. Anushka moved through the space quietly. Security footage and later witness testimony described her walking slowly through the main level of the house. She passed the utility closet and the mechanical room without opening them, pausing briefly to read the labels posted on the doors. She did not touch any controls. Rajiv poured wine and handed Anushka the wall-mounted tablet that controlled the house systems. He treated it casually, as something she had already seen before. At the time, there was nothing outwardly suspicious about the moment. To Rajiv, it was another example of sharing the environment he trusted. To investigators later reviewing the sequence, it marked the point where access, motive, and opportunity fully converged. During the evening hours, Anushka's movements inside the guest house appeared deliberate and controlled. Investigators later described her behavior as calm and methodical. Rajiv prepared dinner initially, then stepped away, allowing her to continue without comment. There was no recorded argument and no sign of tension. Surveillance data from the house systems showed normal activity patterns during this period. Anushka served Rajiv a second glass of wine. Later, she gave him the same travel sleep aid he routinely used on long flights and during schedule changes. Pharmacy records later confirmed the medication was prescribed to Rajiv and commonly used by him. There was nothing unusual about its presence. He took the pill without hesitation. Within approximately 45 minutes, Rajiv's motor responses slowed. His speech became shorter and less coherent before stopping altogether. System data indicated no further movement from his side of the house after that point. He went upstairs and lay down in bed. There was no evidence of struggle or distress. Shortly after midnight, the environment inside the house began to change in a measurable way. Smart home logs later showed the fireplace was activated for an extended burn cycle. Minutes later, the ventilation system was switched from automatic to manual control. This override had been demonstrated to Anushka during their earlier visit. Investigators confirmed the change required deliberate action through the control interface. The fresh air intake was then partially closed. This setting was designed for extreme external conditions and was not part of normal operation. At the same time, the living room smoke sensor was manually disabled. Other sensors, including the hallway detector near the staircase, remained active. Fire investigators later concluded this configuration would delay an alert rather than prevent one entirely. As combustion continued, carbon monoxide accumulated gradually. The sedative in Rajiv's system reduced his ability to wake or respond as oxygen levels dropped. Medical experts later testified that without the medication, he may have sensed the danger earlier. Instead, he remained unconscious. At 12:14 a.m., the smart lock recorded the front door opening. Anushka exited the house and closed the door behind her. The system logged the exit and did not record any re-entry for the next 13 minutes. Environmental data showed rising carbon monoxide levels during that interval. Anushka remained outside, beyond the threshold where exposure would occur, with a direct view through the glass facade into the living area. The house was enrolled in a remote monitoring service as part of the rental agreement. When the hallway sensor finally detected smoke at 12:27 a.m., the alert was automatically routed to county dispatch. No manual call was required. Emergency services were notified based on the system protocol alone. Moments after the alert was sent, Anushka re-entered the property. Exterior cameras recorded her approaching the door at a run. She struck the door repeatedly and shouted, behavior later described by responders as consistent with panic. The timing of her return matched the first audible alarms recorded by the system. Deputies and fire personnel arrived to find minimal structural fire damage but heavy smoke throughout the lower level. The fireplace was still active when they entered. Upstairs, responders located Rajiv in bed. His position had not changed. There were no signs of attempted escape or movement toward windows or doors. His skin showed no burns. Paramedics pronounced Rajiv dead at the scene. The initial assessment listed smoke inhalation as the cause, pending further examination. The lack of visible struggle, combined with the controlled appearance of the environment, led early responders to describe the death as sudden but peaceful. At that moment, the scene appeared consistent with a tragic malfunction. Only later would investigators determine that every condition inside the house that night had been intentionally altered, step by step, to create that outcome. The initial incident report described the death as an accident inside a high-end rental property. Firefighters cited smoke buildup from a fireplace, a possible draft issue, and unfortunate timing. There was no visible damage consistent with a major fire. The structure itself appeared intact. At that stage, there was no immediate reason to classify the death as suspicious. That assessment changed after the medical examiner completed toxicology testing. The autopsy confirmed that Rajiv Malhotra died from carbon monoxide poisoning. The level of carbon monoxide in his blood was high enough to cause death during sleep. The report also identified a sedative in his system. The dosage was not lethal, but it was sufficient to deepen sleep and reduce the body's ability to respond to low oxygen levels. Anushka's medical results raised immediate questions. Her blood work showed minimal exposure to smoke or carbon monoxide. Her throat and airways were not irritated. Emergency responders noted that her physical condition did not match that of someone who had attempted to enter a smoke-filled house or perform a rescue. This discrepancy prompted investigators to request a full fire investigation. The county fire investigator requested digital records from the property's smart home system. As part of the rental agreement, all system activity was stored in a cloud-based hub. The property management company provided complete logs, including fireplace usage, ventilation settings, sensor status, and door activity. The data produced a clear timeline. At 12:07 a.m., the ventilation system was switched from automatic to manual control. 2 minutes later, the fresh air intake was reduced. At 12:11 a.m., the living room smoke sensor was manually disabled. At 12:14 a.m., the front door opened and closed. At 12:27 a.m., the hallway smoke sensor activated and triggered the emergency alert. Investigators noted that each change required deliberate input. None of the actions could be explained by a malfunction or default behavior. The sequence showed intent and familiarity with the system. The wall-mounted control tablet was recovered from the kitchen counter. It had been wiped clean, but forensic testing identified a partial fingerprint along the edge. The print matched Anushka. Device records confirmed that the tablet was the interface used to issue the system commands that night. Detectives interviewed Anushka about the system activity. She stated that she did not understand how the house technology worked. When asked about prior visits to the property, she acknowledged that they had stayed there before. She admitted that Rajiv enjoyed demonstrating the systems and had added her user profile to the control application after she complained of feeling cold during the first trip. Investigators then shifted focus to motive. They subpoenaed records from Rajiv's attorney. The file showed that Rajiv had signed a new will 3 days before the trip, naming Anushka as the sole beneficiary. The same file also showed that Rajiv had scheduled a follow-up appointment for the Monday after the weekend. According to the attorney, Rajiv planned to revisit the document and discuss alternative arrangements, including a trust. Estate records confirmed the scope of the change. Rajiv's children were fully excluded under the revised will. Combined with the system logs, the timeline, and the medical findings, investigators concluded that the death was not accidental. The fire investigation was formally reclassified as a homicide investigation. Detectives moved quickly. A warrant was prepared, and steps were taken to prevent Anushka from leaving the state as the case shifted from a suspected accident to a planned killing carried out through controlled environmental conditions. Anushka was interviewed under recording after investigators completed the initial forensic review. From the start, detectives noted that her responses followed a pattern. She claimed confusion and fear, but avoided specifics. Investigators did not allow the conversation to drift. They focused only on actions that were already documented. They asked why the ventilation system had been switched from automatic to manual control. They asked why the living room smoke sensor was disabled while others remained active. They asked why the front door opened at 12:14 a.m., several minutes before the first alarm. Anushka responded that she felt unwell from smoke, stepped outside for air, and panicked. She said she did not understand how the system worked and denied making deliberate changes. Detectives then introduced a single document. It was a copy of notes taken by Rajiv's attorney. The notes were dated and timestamped. They stated that Rajiv had expressed doubt about the revised will and planned to revisit it after the weekend. Investigators added a second document, a message Rajiv sent to his accountant the same morning he left for the trip. The message requested a draft trust option that would include his children again. At that point, Anushka stopped speaking for several seconds. She asked how investigators could know what Rajiv intended to do. The lead detective responded that intent was not the issue. The sequence of events was. The window between the will being signed and the planned revision was narrow. The death occurred inside that window. As the case moved forward, prosecutors reviewed Anushka's financial activity. Bank records showed that the morning after the will was signed, she contacted a probate services firm. She requested fee estimates and asked about processing timelines. This contact occurred before the weekend trip and before Rajiv's death. Prosecutors argued that this demonstrated planning rather than reaction. The defense filed motions to exclude the probate inquiry, claiming it was speculative and prejudicial. During a pretrial hearing, the judge ruled that the records were admissible. The court determined that the timing of the inquiry was relevant to motive and intent. At trial, the prosecution relied heavily on technical evidence. A forensic analyst testified about the smart home system. The analyst explained that the system required intentional input for each change. There were no default pathways that could produce the recorded sequence. Each adjustment required a separate confirmation on the control tablet. The prosecution demonstrated the process using the same model tablet. Jurors watched as the analyst navigated the interface, switching to manual mode, reducing the fresh air intake, disabling a specific sensor, and extending the fireplace cycle. Each action generated a confirmation screen. The analyst testified that accidental activation was not possible under normal use. Jurors also heard portions of Anushka's recorded interview. Prosecutors pointed out a shift in her language after detectives mentioned the system logs. Her earlier answers focused on fear and confusion. After the logs were discussed, her responses became precise and technical. Prosecutors argued that this shift showed familiarity rather than ignorance. In closing arguments, the state framed the case around control. They asked jurors to consider whether the sequence of actions reduced Rajiv's chance of waking while increasing Anushka's chance of survival. They argued that every step taken inside the house served that purpose. After deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on charges of first-degree murder and financial exploitation. Sentencing took place several weeks after the verdict. By that stage, the factual disputes were over. The court was no longer weighing evidence or intent. The only remaining task was to determine punishment and resolve the legal consequences of the conviction. The judge addressed the courtroom briefly and directly. The ruling focused on the outcome, not the narrative of the crime. The court stated that the offense involved deliberate preparation and resulted in a loss of life, and that the sentence must reflect both the severity of the act and the breach of personal trust. No further analysis of the evidence was presented. The verdict had already settled that question. Anushka stood without visible reaction as the sentence was read. She did not speak. Her attorney made a short request for leniency, citing her age and lack of prior criminal record. The court acknowledged the request and denied it without extended comment. The sentence imposed was 30 years in state prison, with a mandatory minimum of 25 years before eligibility for parole. The judge specified that the minimum term could not be reduced through good behavior credits. The ruling concluded with a formal statement that the sentence was proportionate to the crime and consistent with state guidelines. Immediately following sentencing, the court addressed the disposition of Rajiv Malhotra's estate. Under state law, a person convicted of causing a death is barred from inheriting from the victim, regardless of any existing testamentary documents. This provision applied automatically and required no separate civil trial. The revised will signed days before Rajiv's death was invalidated in full. Probate proceedings were reopened under court supervision. All accounts and property that had been provisionally transferred were frozen and reviewed. Within months, the estate was redistributed according to the prior legal framework. Rajiv's children were restored as beneficiaries through probate. No restitution was ordered beyond the statutory forfeiture. The court noted that the financial reversal was a legal consequence of the conviction, not an additional penalty. The guest house where the death occurred remained closed during the investigation and trial. After the case concluded, the property owner made repairs and updated safety systems. The house was later returned to the rental market. No public reference to the case appeared in the listing. Anushka filed a notice of appeal following sentencing. The appeal challenged procedural rulings but did not introduce new evidence. After review, the appellate court affirmed the conviction and sentence without modification. The mandate was issued, and the case was formally closed. There were no further hearings. The final record consisted of court orders, system logs, medical reports, and financial filings. Together, they documented how a private weekend ended in a criminal conviction and how a death initially treated as accidental became a resolved homicide case.